Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razum Pereira. February 26th marks the first anniversary of the Balakot Airstrike, which was conducted by the Indian Air Force to target terrorist camps operating in the town of Balakot in the Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan. On February 26, 2019, in the wee hours, India carried out airstrikes 12 days after a convoy of vehicles carrying CRPF personnel was attacked by a suicide bomber plotted by Jaish-e-Mohammed in Pulwama district of Jammu. On the 14th of February last year, 40 CRPF personnel were killed in the attack. In retaliation, the Indian Air Force destroyed the biggest terror training camp of the JEM at Balakot on February 26, 2019. A dozen IAF Mirage 2000 fighter jets crossed the India-Pakistan border to attack the terror camp. According to media reports, the terrorist camps at Balakot have undergone a revamp ahead of the first anniversary of the IAF bombings. Today, 1 year on, we will analyze the lessons learnt from the Balakot airstrike. Joining me on the program today are Air Marshal Anil Chopra, retired defence expert; Jaidev Ranade, former Additional Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat and Security and Intelligence expert; Major General Dhruv C. Katoj, retired Director, India Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Air Marshal, let me begin the program with you. First, let's talk about the lessons, really. 1 year on, what are the biggest lessons that we have learnt of the Balakot airstrike?
Yeah, I must say that after 1 year, we must look at the four major blocks or aspects that are related to Balakot. First, the political will and the build-up to Balakot strike. Second, the Balakot strike itself. Third, the reaction from the Pakistani side on 27th. And then look at what has the Indian Air Force learned or needs to learn more in the last 1 year. Political will. I think for long, India has been seen as a weak nation. I was personally very happy that we did Uri and then we did Balakot, and we have brought in a new normal. To plan a strike like we did in Balakot required lots of planning. The first big thing was the timing. You know, on 25th, we had the National War Memorial being inaugurated. The entire security establishment of the country was there, from Prime Minister, NSA, Defense Minister, and all the three service chiefs. Everybody was there. And nobody at that time, at 6 in the evening, knew that that night at 2:30, there'll be Mirages taking off, 12 of them, from Gwalior to do this strike. So, fantastic timing. And see the timing. 3 o'clock is the graveyard shift time. That's the time when human beings are least effective. They are at their low, biological low. So the timing is fantastic. Choosing the target, the intelligence establishment of the country, the NSA, they all did this exercise to choose Jaish-e-Mohammed training center. Why? Because Jaish-e-Mohammed is the ones who had actually carried out the Pulwama attack, and they had claimed it so. So choosing the target. Then choose in that complex on Jabba Top near Balakot, there were targets including a seminary. But mind you, we took the terrorist accommodation, we took the instructors' hostel, but we did not hit the seminary. We didn't want to attack either the Pakistan army, the Pakistani people, the Pakistani religion. We concentrated our attacks on where the terrorists were actually training. And then we chose a weapon which was standoff, Spice 2000, expensive weapon, accurate weapon, a weapon which cost $300,000 million, will not miss its target. 5 Spice were fired. They went through the roof, they penetrated into the ground and then blasted. Now, all the imagery that the whole world has tried to show to everybody, trying to disprove that you have actually hit the targets or not, they didn't realize that Spice just makes a hole. We have seen enough Spice strikes carried out by the Israelis elsewhere in the world. So a hole was made, the weapon penetrated inside and then blew up. The building does not collapse in such a case. And I must tell you, if there was a doubt about the success of this strike, why would it be that the Pakistani establishment would take the media to this site only after 45 days of the event had taken place?
Okay, that having been said, Mr. Ranade, new imagery now shows us that the camps are fully functional. So what is it that we achieved really as far as this airstrike is concerned? Has terrorism been dealt a big blow? What more needs to be done if we had to put an end to terror emanating from Pakistan's soil?
You've asked me three questions rolled into one. Let me give you short, quick answers. The first is a lot was achieved with this strike at Balakot. When I say a lot was achieved, of course, it showed a new kind of political will in India to tackle our adversaries. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, it has put the onus on Pakistan on stopping terror activities. Your second point was about whether, what long-term ramifications this will have. Well, it's changed the vocabulary of strategic calculation between India and Pakistan, both of which are nuclear powers in this region. And you can see how since then the world has been applying pressure on Pakistan, mind you, pressure which it did not earlier, in order to prevent temperatures being raised again. It also flummoxed Pakistan because they did not expect such an airstrike. And an airstrike where we had a kind of deniability built into the selection of the target. As the Air Marshal said, Balakot was chosen. That was a terror training camp, in fact the largest of the Jaish-e-Mohammed. And that was the deniability factor, that no one can object to us striking a terror camp where terrorists were being prepared for striking India. That is what was done. And the third aspect, you said, would it stop terrorism? And can we stop terrorism through the strike? That was not the intention. The intention was to deliver a message that we know where you're training the terrorists. If we find that you're training them to target us, we will take them out. That was the first message. The second message was to the world to join us in applying pressure on Pakistan to stop terrorism from its soil. And I think that's working. And we've had two examples. One is the squeeze by the FATF on Pakistan, which was not there earlier. It started now. And the second was during US President Trump's visit recently, where he was explicit that he is, as he said, working with Pakistan to prevent or to control radical Islamic terror on Pakistani soil. So I think it is working. It has worked so far. Much more needs to be done, but India cannot do it alone. Others have to join hands.
Okay, talking about much more needs to be done. You know, the Air Marshal first called it the new normal. Does it mean that we can do something like this again, General, first and foremost? Secondly, what more needs to be done to control terror?
You know, talking about the new normal, I think I want to go a little bit back from the airstrike at Balakot to 2016 when we carried out the surgical strikes. Now, if you recall at that time, prior to that, we had also carried out a strike in Myanmar. And the Pakistani establishment then gave a statement that Pakistan is not Myanmar. And if one soldier or one Indian soldier crosses the line of control, we will retaliate with a nuclear weapon. That was the threat which they gave. When the surgical strikes took place, we called the nuclear bluff. I think this is something which must be understood. That was the first time the nuclear bluff was called, and political will, as indicated by both my colleagues, was shown. Now we go ahead in time to 2019 when this strike, when the Balakot strike took place. Incidentally, for the surgical strikes, Pakistan denied the strike had taken place, and very rightly so, because had they accepted the fact that the strike has taken place, their public would have asked them, what are you going to do about it? So it was much simpler to de-escalate the situation and say, okay, we keep quiet. Now, when Balakot took place, I think the entire the scenario had changed completely. It was no longer a ground strike. This strike was carried out by the Indian Air Force, and any time when we use the Air Force, it is an escalatory weapon. Now, you have used your Air Force, you have gone deep inside. We have not gone into Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. We have gone into Pakistan proper and taken out the camp there. Now, here again, that the bluff which Pakistan was giving about retaliating with nuclear weapons, that bluff was called. And India stood firm. So a little bit of air action took place. We lost a MiG, they lost a Mirage. I beg your pardon. They lost an F-16. Right? So we called that quits. But the question was, India made it very clear, we are not escalating. Pakistan has escalated. It is up to Pakistan to de-escalate. Now, any time when an attack takes place on us, we will retaliate. The onus of de-escalation rests on Pakistan. I think this is a very major change which has taken place. This is one. Number two, as very rightly said by my colleague, Mr. Ranade, one attack, of course, cannot stop terrorism, and it is not going to stop that easily. But there will be much greater caution as far as Pakistan is concerned. The post the Balakot strike, I think many actions have taken place. Within 6 months, we had Article 370 and 35A being abrogated, and then we had the state being split. Now, you see, that has made a complete change in the political situation and in the equation between India and Pakistan. What has happened now, and I think this is very important to understand, prior to this, whenever conversations would be held anywhere as to resolution of the Kashmir problem, it was the Pakistani impression that the only thing which had to be resolved was the Kashmir which was with India. Now that dynamics has changed. This part of Kashmir is ours and the rest also is ours. So if there has to be any discussion now, it will be on Mirpur Muzaffarabad, which is Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and it will be on Gilgit-Baltistan, which is Pakistan occupied Ladakh. So I think that is a very, very major shift. If you have noticed, post the abrogation and the splitting up of the state, the number of violent incidences which are taking place in the valley have dropped by 70%. I think as we go further in time, they are going to drop even further. And I'm looking at a very peaceful future, say 6 months or 1 year from now.
Right. Okay. All right. Air Marshal, I must ask you this question. Since we've spoken so much about the strike itself, and since it's the first anniversary, what does it take to carry out a strike like this?
The first part of the decision part, we have already spoken about the political go-ahead, because you are going to strike a target which is not in POK, but beyond POK. That is where this place Balakot is. Now, selection of target, then matching the weapons. This is an exercise which Indian Air Force has to do. Timing of the strike, I already mentioned. And now, important parts of the strike which I want to highlight is that immediately after Balakot, after the Prime Minister said that this will be avenged and he has given free hand to the armed forces, the Pakistani establishment was aware that something is going to happen. For those 10 days, the Pakistani Air Force was on an alert. Despite that alert, when Indian Air Force struck, there was no aircraft in the air. In fact, when the Mirages had returned back, only the first 2 F-16s got airborne. A few more aircraft got airborne later. So clearly, despite the enough warning available, Pakistan was taken by surprise. Second, next day what happened? That's important to mention, because there was a reaction, what they call the Operation Swift Retort. The next day at 10 o'clock, when 24 aircraft of the Pakistan Air Force came and struck. Look what we did. First, just 4 of our aircraft were airborne at that time, 2 Sukhois, 2 Mirages, and another 4 MiG-21s, including one of the Abhinandan, got airborne. Pakistan Air Force 24 aircraft were prevented from crossing the LOC, first. Second, they dropped bombs, H-4 bombs by Mirages, REK by JF-17s. Not a single bomb hit the target. They targeted Indian Army, formations on the ground. Not a single target hit. F-16s fired 6 AMRAAM missiles. 5 of them on Su-30s, not a single hit. One that hit Abhinandan was after he had already fired his R-73 missiles. Now, imagine a MiG-21 flown by a young pilot shooting down an AMRAAM armed F-16. So, a different normal altogether. Yes, we made a mistake in the sense, in exuberance, despite being told by the radar, the pilot who had already locked on, and any pilot who is on an aggressive attack, after he's locked on to an F-16 and he's ready to shoot, he will shoot, and he crossed the border. Unfortunate that he also got hit, and he had to eject. And after he ejected, the narrative for us became a little defensive because we had to wait till Abhinandan could be recovered. But I must tell you that the Pakistan Air Force was, and the government was extremely worried, and they were trying to de-escalate the situation because they knew that any action that they take, the Indian Air Force would launch a much, much larger strike for which Indian Air Force was already ready.
Okay, all right. Mr. Ranade, let's also take into context what happened 12 days prior to Balakot in Pulwama. Looking at it from an internal security point of view, can we now 1 year later say that we are far better prepared to handle a situation like that?
Well, on the ground, one doesn't know, but certainly I would say that many steps would have been taken after the Pulwama attack, and some have already been implemented. Like, for example, the manner in which the convoys had moved, the assembly points for the paramilitary forces, those have already been changed and certain modifications have been brought in. But the weak link there always remains the possibility of terrorists having infiltrated and then working to disrupt convoys or troop movements. And I think that is something that we have to guard against. Things are already happening, but let's wait and see. That's why I said that controlling terrorism is very difficult. If I can add one more point to what the General said, and this is just by way of addition, when he spoke about the 5th of August, abolition of 370, etc., I think within a day or two, the Government of India issued the new maps indicating each state, the date on which the state was created, in which they indicated the 2 union territories as well as J&K, I mean the state of Kashmir. And there when you look at it, you have the Aksai-Chin portion added on to the other portions. So it is the entire state which is ours. So now when anyone talks of resolution of Kashmir, it is for the entire region. And that changes the grammar, if I may call it, of discussion on that, in the sense that China is as much on notice as is Pakistan in this particular thing. And that raises multiple other questions of the CPEC, etc., etc. And including in the UN, if the matter has to go, then we've made it very clear now that it has to be the entire portion of J&K and not just the valley.
But China is a different ball game completely, isn't it, when you compare China and Pakistan together?
Well, yes, it is, and it takes us into a totally different sphere.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if I may just mention here, I'm not sort of being overconfident or anything, but the fact that we have demonstrated the political will to claim what is ours, I think that is important. Forget the military force. And as far as standing up is concerned, I would suggest that we don't forget what happened at Doklam and the 73-day face-off.
Absolutely. So posturing is also very important, is what you're suggesting, and the right moves have been made. General, let's talk about another aspect completely now, as far as this particular issue is concerned. We'll go back to the point that the Air Marshal was making. At some level, do you believe that the Balakot airstrike also exposes Pakistan's retaliation capability or Pakistan's vulnerabilities?
Yes, I'm absolutely certain that Pakistan has stood exposed. The Air Force, of course, will give you the better details of that. But the point is, as the Air Marshal Chopra very correctly stated, they were warned. The Prime Minister himself had made a statement that we are not going to let it go just like that. They were on alert. And after being warned, after being on alert, if our aircraft, if our fighters could go inside, deep inside Pakistan territory, destroy the target and come back safely without their aircraft getting airborne, I think speaks very well of the standards of the Indian Air Force. And correspondingly, I think it's, to that extent, I think the Pakistan Air Force stands exposed. There's one more point I want to give as far as the retaliation was concerned. There is a common misconception amongst many people that Balakot was actually a retaliation for what happened at Pulwama. That is not so. The Pulwama attack was avenged very soon after by the Indian Army, by which all the people who were responsible for that attack, including the person who made the bomb, were eliminated. It is important to understand this, that if this was done, then why did you do Balakot? This was a strategic message when we are talking of messaging, which the Indian government has given to Pakistan. We said they were planning another attack. So now we have carried out a preemptive attack to take on Balakot because they were planning an attack on India. And that, as Mr. Ranade said earlier, has become the new normal. Now the world accepts India's right to retaliate before an attack has taken place. And I think that has completely altered the shift in the way we would handle the situation prior to this and the way we are going to handle it in future.
Let me add to what the General has just mentioned. You know, see the level of panic that had set in Pakistan. During this operation, those 2 days, the Indian Air Force had put restrictions of flights in the northern parts of India. But Pakistan had to put restriction on flights over entire Pakistan for 2 months. That is the level of insecurity that had set in Pakistan. Another thing they did was that they immediately called for a meeting of the NCA, the Nuclear Command Authority. That was a sort of a signal they wanted to give to the whole world that, you know, so imagine if they are going to give a nuclear signal for a strike like this. What is the level of insecurity they are already feeling after this strike? So there are many issues that have come up after this strike. And to some extent, the Pakistani military establishment has shown itself in a poor light, if I may use that word.
Okay, all right. Time to get closing comments now from all my guests with the best way forward, really, and how do we look forward from all of this? Starting first with you, Mr. Ranade.
Well, I think Pakistan is rattled or was rattled, is rattled. Their main issue, which is Kashmir, vis-a-vis India, they suddenly find the ground is shifted and it's no longer an issue. They're not able to take it up. They're not getting international support for it. Despite China helping them at the UNSC and trying to get special sessions, that didn't work. And now, really speaking, they don't know what to do. And Imran Khan is virtually on record as having said that. I think as far as India is concerned, it shows that we are not, trying to be adventurous. We are not taking undue risks. We are just safeguarding what we feel is our, position, our taking care of our security. So I think we are headed for a period where our neighbors have to look at us differently, particularly the adversarial neighbors. And it opens up, in fact, a door or a window for negotiations, provided they're able to control the unruly elements or the turbulent elements on their side.
You know, before I go to the General, one quick reaction on the whole Afghan situation as well, because, you know, up until a few months ago, Pakistan was completely isolated. They felt like they were in a corner. But now they seem, or they want to portray that they are relevant again because of the entire Afghanistan situation. And should we be wary of that?
Well, we certainly, our prudent analysis would show that we have to be prepared for the fallout, for the downstream of terrorism striking us. But I think we are strong enough. After all these years, we built up enough of a buffer to take care of it. And also, I'd like to say that after the 29th, once they have that agreement and if they sign it, there are two questions. One, does the US really withdraw in such a large number that they're not able to maintain some kind of stability for the new government in Afghanistan?
And secondly, 640, I think, is what
that is the figure they talked about.
President Trump
and the second is, will Pakistan be given a free hand to really create a problem in Afghanistan? After all, there are tensions between the Afghan Pashtuns and Pakistan. So I would not say that
it's all hunky-dory.
It's all hunky-dory either.
Okay, all right, General.
I think what we really need to do now, firstly, as far as Afghanistan, I just want to add one line. Should the situation really deteriorate and the Americans pull out, there is, of course, a possibility of some of these Afghan fighters coming into Kashmir. But I think we are very well prepared to handle it now because the political scenario has changed. I think what we really need to do now, as far as the state of Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, is to ensure the developmental agenda which has been spoken of by the government of India. And if we can get our administration in order, if we can get our criminal justice system working in a much faster and quicker time frame, the security establishment has done its bit. The political authority, the political, the initiatives, I think have been outstanding. So now we are just looking at certain other things. And if we can get that act in order, I have a feeling that once we see great progress in Jammu, in the present Jammu and Kashmir, the people from Gilgit and Baltistan and even from Mirpur Muzaffarabad in Pakistan occupied Kashmir are going to raise up their hands and say, we want to join India. And I think that should be our aim now, to get those people to say, we want to join up with India. And then we will find a complete change in scenario.
Okay, all right. And Air Marshal, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Yeah, there are two issues which we have not discussed much today, but I think I need to highlight them. One is the information warfare and influence operations. It was seen that after Balakot and the day after that, there's been a very active, offensive launched by the Pakistani side, led by the DG ISPR and his huge team, both military and civilians, to try to change the perception not only in India but around the world. I think that's one area where we need to also have a fresh look at the influence operations. The second thing is that I think it's time that we look at the modernization of the armed forces. Certainly, we all know that Indian Air Force is down to 30 fighter squadrons vis-a-vis the authorized 42. And I think some out of the budget funds have to be allotted for all the three services to be able to modernize quickly and bridge the gap that has been there, and more so because there's always a threat of a two-front war.
Absolutely. Bravery is one aspect, but giving the right kind of technology is another as well. And that's something that we need to give our armed forces, is what the Air Marshal is suggesting. On that note, I'll call it a wrap in this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion, or the takeaway is really 1 year since Balakot, is that we've shown the world that we have political will to take on terror across the border, is what the panelists are all suggesting in unison. Also, we achieved our stated goal as far as Balakot is concerned. We called Pakistan's nuclear bluff, is what the panelists are suggesting as well. And also, it exposed Pakistan's vulnerability really as far as reacting to the entire situation. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.